started here. We are now recording. Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IC Star Spring 2022 HR Roundtable. My name is Devin Hayes. I'm an employment attorney at Von Briesen and Roper and a member of the IC Star's Milwaukee Advisory Board of Directors. Thank you to all the organizations who are attending today, and a very special thank you to Molson Coors for sponsoring today's event. Today, we have a number of different topics to discuss, including perks and benefits, work-life balance, and promoting recognition and internal mobility, and how they relate to the Great Resignation and retaining talent. The event today is to connect HR professionals with DEI professionals and recruiters to open the conversation about retaining employees, but thinking differently about hiring and considering non-traditional talent during these unpredictable times. We hope in the future we are able to reconvene in person to discuss more human resource topics. I'm going to pass it over now to Jordan A. Moore, our talent placement manager, to kick off our panel discussion and introduce our panelists.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Devin. We will begin today's event and introducing our panel. So first up, we have Gennaro. He is a native New Yorker, and he grew up in the Bronx and worked his entire career in New York City prior to coming to Milwaukee. I don't know why he came here, but from New York City, he led global teams throughout the EU, Asian Pacific, Americas. He's the head of HR operations, talent acquisition, and learning and development for Milwaukee County government. And a fun fact about him is that he's traveled extensively throughout the Americas, Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and the Caribbean. He's learned the basics of each language for the country he was visiting. And in this theme, he's also a home chef with a global cuisine repertoire. Next up, we have Lou. Lou is from Nottingham in the UK, where Robin Hood is from. She joined Molson Coors 6 years ago as a director for talent development and resourcing. From then, she moved to Canada to lead their diversity talent management practices and lived in Toronto for 2.5 years, and then moved right to Milwaukee in May 2020, right in the middle of the COVID lockdowns. She is vice president for talent management and lead talent, data, engagement, and recruitment activity across the Americas. She has 2 girls who are 10 and 12, 2 Vizsla dogs, 1.5 and 13 weeks, and she is an identical twin. The other lives in London. Lastly, we have Caitlin as Quad's talent management consultant for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Caitlin creates and executes strategy to support the DEI learning and development of Quad's people leaders. She is a lifelong learner and teacher, earning her bachelor's of science in marketing and Spanish from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and her MBA from Marquette University. She currently serves on Quad's DEI task force and is a member of Tempo Milwaukee's Emerging Women Leaders. She is currently working towards her 200-hour yoga certification. Thank you all for participating. We are so happy to have you all here. We will stay on schedule and get started now with our questions. Before we get started, if any of you all have any questions for the panel that you would like to ask them, please drop them in the chat. We will have time set aside this morning to go over the questions and ask our panelists. Okay, so how has the Great Resignation affected your organization?
And kick off. Good morning, everybody. Really good to be here. Really proud to be a sponsor and part of this amazing panel. So welcome. It's interesting because I've read a few articles that are renaming the Great Resignation and calling it the Great Reshuffle. And I would probably agree more with a Great Reshuffle than a Great Resignation, because to me, a Great Resignation kind of means that people are doing what Caitlin's doing, 200 hours of yoga and going off to do things that they've never done before. And of course that has happened. What we're seeing, I think, is that people are starting to think about, okay, where do I want to work and what is the organization and what's the culture I want to work in? Do I want to go into the office? Is it hybrid, or do I want to be, remote, for example? So I think we're seeing more of a great reshuffle. We return back into the office 3 days a week. Obviously, our breweries have been 24/7, in our breweries throughout the whole pandemic. So as corporate offices, we returned back into the office, and not everybody wants to be back in the office, obviously, and some people love being back in the office, and therefore it's a difficult decision to make and put a stake in the ground. We certainly saw, as I think many people did, and a lot of the articles showed, we ask our employees every quarter a number of questions from a pulse survey, an engagement survey, and we saw an uptick in people saying that they were looking or expecting to move on within the next 6 months. It's a question that we ask every 3 months. We did see an increase in turnover kind of middle of last year, like into the third quarter. I think as we were returning to the office, I think as the Great Resignation and businesses were starting to employ again, that's come down, fortunately for us. So turnover has kind of got back to normal. We've seen it as a bit of an opportunity actually as well, because we're really hiring. We've increased our headcount across the organisation. We've moved to Milwaukee as our corporate office. So it's been an opportunity for us to seek a lot of talent and bring that into our organisation. So we've not seen a massive difference, other than actually quite an opportunity for us in terms of attracting different talent and new talent into the organisation.
I would agree with everything that Lou just mentioned, and give you kind of the contextual approach that we've taken at the county. I like to view this as the Great Reaffirmation versus the Great Resignation. Organizations have been kind of laser focused in appreciating what they have now because of these circumstances. So that's resulted in really having a data supported proposition as to what our workforce looks like now, what we aspire our workforce to look at a future state from a DEI perspective, and then really focus on internal mobility. The reaffirmation of the people who have come to the organization, want to work here, and they're looking for something that's going to make them sticky, something that's going to keep them around. So if you're looking at internal mobility as a priority in the organization, and you're putting organizational development layers to your L&D function, where people can look at real attainable ladders, rungs on the ladder that they know, particularly in technology, if they're in a desktop support role and they aspire to be a exchange architect, for example, they have the capability within the organization to take training, to take certification courseware and move towards there. Now, from an HR perspective, it's also kind of solidified our roles as subject matter experts. The organization's leadership is looking for coaching. They're looking for mentoring to handle kind of the people economics of the workforce. HR is kind of unique in every organization that we have and own both a quantitative production measurement as well as a qualitative. No, your legal department really doesn't get too tied up with employee engagement and quality of work life and total rewards. That's within our swim lane. So we not only have to provide, the data behind these measurements to get the organization from a budget line perspective to spend money in the right places. We also have to make sure that we don't have change fatigue within the organization of all these kind of innovations that we're trying to push and get them to this nirvana state, ideally. We have to, think of how the employee population is going to really adopt it and get behind it. So for us, it's really an opportunity-rich environment. These things that have changed during the pandemic have put a very glaring focus on remote working and the value of work-life balance and employee mental hygiene. All these sorts of things probably would have come around eventually, but it was kind of slammed to the front of the line because of pandemic situations.
I couldn't agree more with both of my fellow panelists. You know, at Quad, like many organizations, we have very different needs from our employees. We think about our employees in almost three different, I would say three different ways. One, we have a very large manufacturing workforce that's all across the country, primarily in kind of the Midwest region, but we have plants across the United States, Poland, Mexico, and so forth. We also have a group of employees who are more in administrative roles like HR and finance, IT, you know, keep some of the SG&A, keep the business going. And then we also, our third group of folks are primarily focused in our agency solutions realm. And so those folks are focused on lots of marketing, think ad agencies, digital agencies, and so forth. And traditionally, one of Quad's values, you may notice I'm wearing a uniform, is we all put on our blues, our uniform, one leg at a time. Basically, there's kind of a minimization effort of we're all part of the same team. And what the Great Resignation and this time, the pandemic, has really helped us in leadership realize is people need different things. And it may sound super simple, but really looking at policies, procedures, and tearing those apart and rebuilding them to be effective for the various types of employees, and making sure that we're keeping abreast of what those needs look like, how they're changing, how the pandemic has impacted people. It's been really, really exciting, but really difficult as well. So I think that's one of the biggest impacts that we've been seeing when we look at the Great Resignation. You know, that's telling us that perhaps the needs of our employees are not being met. And what can we as an employer do to make sure that we're surfacing and touching on all of those things for people?
I like the point you said, Janara, about the great affirmation, right? And you know, the research, the research on what employees are looking for, hybrid aside, doesn't really change, right? Culture, DEI, you know, it's been elevated, of course, and some companies have needed to our point, catch up on some of that stuff. But I think focusing on your brand, your employee brand, your culture, and being proud, right? We work in an organization that's brand led, right? People are very proud to work for the organization. It really helps at this time, particularly in the talent market, I think, and internal talent. I read, we were talking as a panel group the other day, and we were talking about, there was an article I read that said 65% of employees look externally first for their next job opportunity before they look internally. That's amazing, isn't it? Just thinking about what you're saying, Janara, about really focusing on internal talent, retaining internal talent, developing, growing, ever more important, because people naturally look externally first, which surprised me.
You know, it's
look at a different country.
It's surprising, but I've always been a staunch data advocate, because in each environment that I've worked in, when I came in, I was hired with the mandate to be a change agent. And when you come in with a challenge or burden, depending on how you look at it, you have to really put forth the ethos that you can't improve what you don't measure. So when you look at statistics like Lou mentioned, that are universally available from the Harvard Business Review and Inc. magazine and various academic white papers, Organizations are crazy if they don't acknowledge that the people are looking at a 65% level because there's active employment marketing within the marketplace. So as an organization, you have to control what you can control and put your story out there and market internally, meaning that your talent acquisition function has to make easily available whatever that they have open. Your HR partners in each of the divisional areas of your organizations have to kind of get up and get 15 minutes at every divisional all hands meeting and say, we're looking for this opportunity internally, and then talk to the leadership of that divisional area and say, hey, here's the skills inventory for your team. You have 3 or 4 candidates that would be ideal for this. And then your talent leadership has to really have a come to Jesus conversation with each of your organization's divisional areas and say your job description and what you're trying to go to market for is excluding consideration of our internal talent. So let's not look at internal talent and external talent on the same level. You know, we should give a home field advantage to our employees and look at opportunities to say and codify that if an internal candidate is at 65 or 70% of the need, we're going to take that person, we're going to attach a development plan, and we're going to get them up to 100%. But we're going to keep somebody who raised their hand, said, I believe in your organization's mission, our organization's mission, and we're going to take them through stages of their career. We have to step up as the subject matter experts on people economics, again, to advocate for that and present really a data-backed argument to senior leadership in our organizations that's going, you know, for a commercial organization, that's going to improve our P&L. That's going to improve our retention. That's going to do all the positive metrics are going to be better if we kind of focus on doing those sorts of things.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question is very sensitive, at least for me. During these past couple of years, we have all pretty much been working remotely or have had some experience working remotely. I am not a tech person. I can only assume that you all aren't either. So with us all working remotely and making sure that we're all connected to attend meetings, to facilitate events as such, what strategies are you implementing to keep your tech workforce engaged during this time? Kaylin?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to start. So, you know, one thing that we've been really focused on at the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone was just, you know, out in their own homes and trying to figure things out, we started realizing pretty quickly the difference between managerial styles. And some managers felt very uncomfortable with this because they felt like they didn't have the control or they couldn't see what their employees were doing the whole time. And we in talent management quickly uncovered that there are a lot of micromanagers, but perhaps not as many managers who were helping people one-on-one, working through, like perhaps providing them the framework and then allowing those folks to really fill in and be challenged mentally and create solutions to problems. And so what we've been focused on is really helping to support leadership and help them understand what we view as important for our leaders in the organization, including creating one-on-one environments, building trust, building relationships, and allowing our employees to really be more empowered and feel more engaged with their work. Unfortunately, there's, you know, that lack of social interaction, and so we can try to address that in various ways virtually. But our big shift has been trying to not create a micromanagement environment, but rather an environment where employees are really supported and feel challenged by their work.
I would tag on that, and I was actually typing a reply to one of the questions in the chat. Just I'll verbalize. I think Caitlin really hit the nail on the head with that word empowerment. When in the question I was responding to was about internal mobility and why employees might not step up to pursue an internal position versus looking to the outside first. Part of what the pandemic has forced in our organization is to have people managers understand the personality types of the teams that they lead. So in my L&D team, for example, I internalized our DISC assessments, where we have dedicated staff that are certified to proctor DISC assessments and walk our different teams through that. When you get a familiarity of DISC, you know that some work personality types are not going to be the forefront, hey, get me something great, and be able to kind of say, here's the accounting of everything that I did in this organization. I should be at that next level. It's just not within their makeup to do that. So as an organization and as the subject matter experts in HR, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that our workforce knows you are grown adults. You do own your career. Where our side of the equation is to provide the platforms and vehicles for you to build competency, for you to build capability. But you have to step up and say, hey, maybe this would be good for me. Maybe that wouldn't be good for me. And then have that ownership. So part of our education to the workforce that we've pushed over the last 2 years is really about how do you get there? How do you have a conversation with your direct supervisor about goals and career? And then with our people managers, we're teaching them how to have what's referred to now as stay interviews. Give us reasons why that person should be here for as long as we could keep them, and then how we could keep them. But I think there's an underemphasis on the two sides of the conversation. There's definitely employee ownership that has to be elevated and mandated. And then, the people managers are what HR leadership can instruct, mentor, and coach as to their ownership piece. But again, it's really that two-sided equation that has to be emphasized.
I was thinking about the question from keeping our teams engaged, certainly during the pandemic. As I mentioned, we returned back into the office in October, 3 days a week. So that particularly for our tech workforce, how are we keeping the teams engaged, returning into the office and retained? Primarily for us, leadership, I wrote down empowerment, ownership, the things that we talked about, but I did just write leadership. Our first value is about putting people first. And another value is kind of learn every day. And that for our tech community, that is particularly important, right? If we think about how we're engaging, how we're developing, spending a lot of time on personal development, career discussions, personal development plans, making sure that we are giving opportunity for kind of growth projects, cross-functional experiences, on the job assignment stuff, so we can keep people engaged. I think we also have quite a strategy to bring a lot of stuff and modernize IT and bring it back in-house, right? So that's quite exciting for the team. And also, we're a relationship culture. and we're business partners, right? In the tech world, we're a business partner to the organization. So making sure that our tech teams are closer to the distributors, closer to our consumers, you know, whether that's kind of going out on, you know, rides and understanding the consumer and the customer a bit more, and just kind of not being so back office. And then I think about some of the programs like IC Stars, right? Just the phenomenal success that we've had in our 3 new hires in our organization, 2 of which are in Jonah's team, we mentioned earlier. You know, being part of programs like that, involving our workforce and our teams and communicating things, being on panels like today, right? It's really cool, isn't it? And I think people are engaged and really love that their organization is A, involved in that kind of stuff, and B, is involved themselves and can be part of that. So certainly development focused, career focused, and then, you know, just being that feeling of that pride of the organization that, you know, we're working in the right direction for us.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm wondering, how has the pandemic and the Great Resignation affected your recruiting and your hiring practices in your organization?
Man, we have changed in so many ways in recruiting and hiring, Jardine. Thank you for the question. Would, you know, of course, love to hear from our other panelists on this one too, but we've really changed the way that we think about bringing in talent and what types of talent we're looking for. Traditionally, we'd been very geography based. And so for us, being able to leapfrog from like having to be in, you know, a plant or a sales office or a creative agency setting to creating this virtual environment where we don't have to be location or geography specific, has helped us attract and retain new talent that we've never been able to really bring to our organization before. It creates a very different style of thinking. And creating, we have to make sure that in doing so, we look at the entire recruitment process. We're taking a look at language of our job applications. We're looking at how people are being perhaps throughout that process, how people are actually interacting. Is there some kind of scorecard that we can create more objectivity for each person? We're trying our very hardest to take out some of those biases that perhaps we have held. And so not only are we able to attract a greater amount of people to our organization, but I think we're trying to create equities within our system to make sure that we're bringing in the best talent for that role. And we look forward to continuing to support those people. Secondly, what we've been doing is working very closely with our community. So as many of you may think, manufacturing centers are really large. They need a lot of space and they tend to be in a little bit more rural areas. And we know that we have a lot of really talented folks located in more of the urban centers, cities, such as Milwaukee. So we've been creating really innovative ways to connect some of the folks who are looking for work with our manufacturing facilities. We're taking off the table worries about transportation. We're providing transportation. We are making sure that folks who are coming to us have an extended amount of onboarding so that they understand some of the language, the jargon, really understand the role that they're going to play in the organization. And then conversely, we're working on making sure that our leaders have a better understanding as well of some of these incredible and rich cultures that we're bringing into our organization. And I'll tell you, the learning experience is so mutual and it's so beneficial. We're seeing great creativity coming out of this. We're seeing new ideas that we've never thought of before, and it's working. It's really working. So we're being creative in various different ways. And I love the idea of this forced innovation and hoping that we're becoming even more of what, our culture really stands for, of that inclusive environment where together we can do more than individuals apart.
I can tell you, in a time of pandemic, people drink beer, which has been great. But we're very, very fortunate to be in an organisation that was deemed essential, and many people might smile when they say a beer company or beer is essential, but for many people, so we literally, we'd restructured, many of you might know, we'd restructured and we brought our kind of corporate back office to Milwaukee at the same time as the pandemic. So we were at peak anyway. I think if I look back, maybe being able to go virtual with the organization for us means that we can act with speed. We can widen our panel. We're not thinking, right, everybody's in Milwaukee, we need to book a room, we need to get only the people that are based in Milwaukee. We can think of a panel, and we're really focusing on kind of diverse slates, but also diverse panels as we come into the organization. That's really, really, really helped us. And we hired 1,200 people in 2020, 500 of which were salaried and were virtual. So I think for us, acting with speed, but then not forgetting, and I made an offer yesterday, it was really interesting, somebody who lived in Atlanta, everything we'd done virtually. And he said to me, and the role was based in Milwaukee, and he said to me, before I accept, can I come to Milwaukee? I've never been to Milwaukee. And you forget, don't you? Because people still need to come and connect and see the office and walk the brewery and things like that. So I think for me yesterday, it was a bit of a sharp kind of intake of, well, why would you want to do that? Because, we want you. And, so still understanding that it is two-way and virtual doesn't work for everybody all the time, but knowing that it's really helped. I think as well, you mentioned it, Caitlin, as well, but, the competition for talent has got so strong and so tight. And so how we are elevating our brand as that employer of choice, to your point, Gennaro, both internally and externally, being really intentional, thinking about how we get access to talent that we would not normally have had access to. We have really focused on, from a job description perspective, experience as much as qualification. So we've removed for 99% of our roles the degree requirement. Because we know that everybody doesn't come up the same route. So we've had to really think about intentionally, what do we need in the organization, not what we want, and how do we go out and actually sell ourselves and promote ourselves, rather than kind of 2 or 3 years ago being able to sit back and have a number of people wanting to come and work for us, right? So it's been quite insightful. It's interesting, we even put together a guide as we return to the office to make sure that we were inclusive in our interview process now that we were back in the office, because some people wanted to do virtual, some people wanted to do in person, and we were like, we need to do the same, whether that's all virtual or all in person. So just thinking through some of those things are probably some of the things that we never thought we would have had to think through that. Largely, it's been a game changer for us from a recruitment perspective, honestly. And I think it's sped up, from a technology perspective, and some of the things that we're doing from a technology perspective in our interview process, we probably wouldn't have done for another couple of years had it not been, forced upon us. So overall, I think fairly positive moves in the right direction.
Yeah, I would say, and not to come off as a Pollyanna optimist, I think everything in the pandemic majoritively leans towards positive outcomes. We've accelerated as HR practitioners, we've accelerated and been given the opportunity to accelerate things that we've been talking about all along. But now, the alacrity and speed of the interview process is something that has to be a reality to be competitive. the willowing away of everything but the kitchen sink in job descriptions, where it's a $15 an hour job and they're asking for a master's degree and sometimes a PhD. You know, come on, it's not really that serious. We're boiling job descriptions down to their base elements. But for our environment, I'm really thankful that the process, the recruitment process, is being driven by the subject matters in HR, subject matter experts in HR, right? And this team has the mandate to challenge everything. Challenge when you have that intake meeting and get that notification of an opening, challenge why you're not considering internal resources first, and then presenting the value proposition as to why it makes a heck of a lot more sense. We've also kind of shifted that because of that challenge for those kind of key sole contributors or frontline type of roles, going to internals as a priority, that's allowed us to hire at a more junior level. So if you put in mechanisms and practices that every time one of those key contributor type of roles become available, that you have a roster, that you have a bench of internals that could fill that position, you now go to market from a backfill perspective at a much more junior role. And then when you're staffing at those much more junior roles, you have a much greater level of latitude as to what you can accept into that role, which in turn drives your DEI initiatives in the organization. So think about that. Every organization, regardless of industry, when you look at the pyramid of high-level sole contributors in management, at the base of that pyramid, the population is typically very diverse and representative of the market that you're doing business in. As you go up the pyramid, it becomes less and less so. So if you think about putting the ladders in place, if you think about putting the pay job families in place and the succession plans in place, to get people from the base of the pyramid towards the pinnacle of the pyramid, you're kind of having a self-fulfilling prophecy about your DEI goals, right? And then when you get to that level of consistently looking at backfill, going to market at more junior levels, again, you can reinforce that. One of the things I'm tremendously proud about with IC Stars is that each cohort that's graduated is a bunch of unicorns within the technology space. When I was an IT guy, back before I got into human resources, I was definitely a unicorn being a Puerto Rican in working in that space, right? I didn't see a lot of people whose names sounded like mine or looked like me. And IC Stars, on the other hand, majoritively female, majoritively BIPOC, each cohort that they graduate, right? So our ability to partner with IC Stars, and we just made a few hires as well, helps to drive those initiatives. It helps to, partnerships with organizations like this help us to, really push our workforce to where it should be within the technology space.
I'm going to answer Elizabeth, your question, if you don't mind, while we're on topic. What happened internally to get buy-in to remove degree requirements? A lot. It was a project, and I say a lot not because we were trying to push uphill on it, but we wanted to do it right, and we wanted to not just move from we're going to remove it. We wanted to talk about the why. We wanted to ensure that people understood that we weren't changing the bar, right? That we were increasing our access to talent. So On the call, actually, I see Harmony Lucia, who is our senior manager for talent acquisition, but was also our HR business partner for IT at the time. So our HR business partner spent a lot of time with our leadership teams to talk about the why, to talk about the benefit, and then to essentially look at all of our roles and really, really, really challenge whether people needed a degree at that level. And it was interesting, you know, you talk about the pyramid, and there was certainly more challenge on roles at the more senior level than there were at the junior level. And we had to really challenge that mindset, honestly, to say, well, that's actually going to create a barrier in our organization as people move up the organization. And actually, once kind of challenged and thinking it through, many people were like, well, yeah, of course you wouldn't like necessarily need a degree as long as they've done this and this and then can prove that they've done this and this. So I would say it was really well received as an organization. I think with everything, we'll talk about our DEI culture and commitments later, but with everything, you need that leadership from the top, right? So our Chief People and Diversity Officer, absolutely, you know, almost pushing us, when are we doing it, Lou? When are we doing it? And our CEO and the leadership team. So ensuring that we got that understanding there and that commitment before we then went into the leadership teams to really understand, explain the why. So probably a project 2 or 3 months with numerous people kind of and numerous leaders and HR business partners working on it. But yeah, I think we're at 2% of our roles that need a degree, and that's really if there's a technical reason, right? So
yeah, it's that challenge everything mindset, right? Mm-hmm. When you again look at the subject of unconscious bias, a lot of folks in your people manager roles in organizations, they have a degree and they think, well, I had to get one, so everybody that has to come after me has to too. And it's more of focused on the actual work. Is the work aided by having an academic degree that, you know, I remember when I went to college, I cut most of my classes to go play pool in the student center. And everything that I did, you know, was kind of last minute in terms of production. I was not a star student. I got good grades, but I was not a star student in terms of work ethic. So think about that when you look at job descriptions in the workplace. You know, are you really having an advantage by mandating a degree or changing it preferred or nice to have on the job descriptions when you go to market? Real quick response to Natalia. We encourage individual learning in the organization by making our L&D function I say customer facing entity. It's not a back office entity. So for example, I go around with the senior folks on the L&D team, and we do road shows on a regular basis. And we go through the various curricula that's available. And then we also illustrate the capability for ILTs, instructor-led trainings, where we'll customize it to whichever division that is. It might be the senior leadership might want to have a DISC assessment. They might want to have an emotional intelligence assessment. We do a new manager orientation for every new manager that gets into the organization, where we also apply that to people who've been there a while, so that we get a 360 feedback from the areas that they partner with and the people that they lead. We also look at regular marketing and communications. We mentioned that at the start of the conversation, that your panelists here have a really big hand in the employment branding for the organization externally. But we also do that internally as well. You know, we talk about the opportunities here to both learn and the opportunities in advancement that we could talk to our workforce about.
Yeah, and if I could couple off that to help answer Mike's question, I know Lou mentioned in the chat too, what certifications do our recruiters have as it relates to DEI? We too are taking a very internal approach there. We've worked with actually 3 different consultants to help bring forward really incredible content for our recruiters. Our HR team and recruiting team were one of the first groups that we took through DEI-like training, inclusion training, if you will, and how to be an effective ally. We didn't stop there though, because bias is just within all of us, right? And even as we become more and more conscious of different cultural, cultural competence in general, what we've also learned is that we have to make sure that we're taking a look at our processes and procedures and trying to create as equitable of a process as possible. It's exactly what Lou was talking about and Gennaro were talking about, making sure that job requisitions in and of themselves don't look as biased, making sure that we have a really great diverse set of applicants before we even begin the process. We want to make sure that we have a great group of people applying to each of our job postings. And the other reason that we do that is because the hiring manager plays a very important role. Hiring managers exist across the entire organization. And so as we've been catching up and making sure that our people leaders are also trained, we want to allow as an objective of process as possible, which can be challenging when you have over 1,600 people leaders across the organization that may be hiring at any given time. And, it's one thing for our recruiters who do this every day, day in and out. It's something that's very topical and top of mind for them. A hiring manager may hire one employee every 8 months, 3 years, right? So keeping everyone up to speed and make sure that it's a critical element in their process is really important. And that's why we're trying to impact this in a number of different ways.
Thank you.
I'll just tag on to that real quick, that one of the biggest things that we focused on too, in order to help our recruitment and talent acquisition staff, is to own the recruitment process across the organization. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is we are completely prescriptive in terms of how a recruitment process is going to happen. The selection of the panel, what the roles are going to be in that panel, and what the timeline is for deliverables. So when a people manager, particularly to Caitlin's point, who only hires sporadically, says we have a need, they have a full little kit that they could access in all the collaterals in there on how they engage with the HR stakeholders, how and what the timelines are going to be, and what the deliverables from each stakeholder, that they, not only who they have to select, but what those deliverables are. So, from a technology perspective, you always want to have clean design and repeatable processes. This is how, HR ends up not being thrown under the bus, that it's a one-sided attainment of these lofty metrics around DEI. We're doing a great job of it. But if we have a completely random, non-unified recruitment process, it all, it goes on a highway to hell. It doesn't get done, and it becomes completely unmanageable.
While we're here, I do want to circle back to a good question that one of my interns asked, Jaquan Reed. He asked, has there been any pushback on the learning and development of internal employees over external candidates?
I'm going to jump in real quick and just say that has been a highlight and not a bug. Part of what Lou had mentioned before, to bring, college sociology 101 to the table here. People's hierarchy of needs are usually driven by the ability to grow and augment their knowledge. And when you look at the engagement data that we operate off of, there's a hunger within the workforce for training, for learning, and hopefully to expand to actual certification attainment. So it's something that our population is telling us that they want. And I know for me, when I was in IT, I put money probably at third or fourth on my list. I looked at the operation, if they were going to continuously train me, let me play with the coolest, latest and greatest toys. And if the network, I was on the network side, if the network was, scaling upward, the bigger network that I could get access to and have oversight over, that kept me around because I knew that was advancing my career.
Lou or Caitlin, do you all have anything to add?
I think that there's a balance for us for internal development and external hiring. I mean, we've needed to hire externally because we have more roles in Milwaukee and Chicago with the with the reorg than we have people, right? So for now, it's about stabilizing, retaining, and developing that talent. And we've overhired in some instances as well. So making sure that that we retain that talent, keep them engaged, and promote them through the organization. So I think there is a bit of a balance. I think external talent want to see internal development, right? And people want to stay in an organization that is going to develop and then grow them. So I think there's a win-win from both sides. But I think there is a balance. As an organization, we are not as diverse as we would want to be, and are not as diverse as some of our communities in which we operate. So actually hiring externally for us can bring in different thought, different backgrounds and diversity to our organization where we might not have it. And then internally, everybody wants to stay and grow and develop in an organization and continue to be challenged, whether that's in their role or moving up. So definitely a balance for us.
Yeah, I agree, Lou. We have a balance too. And part of it is just actually based on some generational changes within our organization. So as many organizations are working through, we have 5 generations working with one another all at the same time. And at the early parts of Quad, we're 51, we'll be turning 51 this year. But at the early parts of Quad, in the 70s and the 80s, as a primary printing company, they were growing like gangbusters. I mean, honestly, it was a ton of greenfield growth. It was one of the primary ways for brands and retailers to reach people. And then in about 2008, 9, 10, we had to really think differently because there's big changes to the industry. Print was consolidating. There were just an influx of other channels, marketing channels to be able to reach consumers. And we lost, I think, a lot of talent. So, we have this pocket where we have a ton of folks who are retirement age. And then we have a gap. And then we have a ton of folks who are probably maybe 5 years or less in the organization. And so what we are quickly realizing is not only do we have to fill that gap with incredible talent, attract them to our organization, invest and develop those folks, but we have to intentionally train and keep the folks who are newer to our organization. And there's a lot of efforts internally to make sure that we are able to invest in this talent, develop them quickly, promote them as needed, because we see the writing on the wall with the folks who will be retiring, we need to make sure that we're bringing that talent along. So it's very interesting. I think some of it was kind of industry related. And so we're playing a little bit of catch up there. And that's why we're looking for talent in both of those ways, much like what Lou was describing.
Thank you. I do want to hold ourselves accountable to the time that we've allotted this morning. We have a couple of panel questions left, but we got off on a great conversation, and that's nothing wrong with that. We can save those questions for the Q&A later. I do want to transition us into the discussion portion of the morning. So I have pre-made some breakout rooms on 3 different topics. The first breakout room is for perks and benefits. The second breakout room is for work-life balance. And the last breakout room is for recognition and internal mobility. All of our guests here today are welcome to choose whichever room they would like to go to. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and open up all of the rooms. You all will be in there for 20 minutes. And I will call you all back once it's time for the Q&A portion, okay? So we're going to go ahead and get into some questions that were asked in the chat before we broke out. Let me see. I know Mike Hoffman, sorry to put you on the spot there, but I know you asked a really good question before that I wanted to circle back to.
Okay. Oh, about the recruiting certifications?
Yes, and DEI.
Right. So our organization is a recruiting organization and a consulting firm. So our recruiting staff has grown by leaps and bounds. And as we are 86% diverse internally ourselves, we want to get better at all aspects of, recruiting those types of folks for our clients. And, when I say, when we're trying to get the recruiters, it happens at that level. It happens with where those recruiters, the decisions that they're making on the spot. And so we started implementing certification, and we just started that, which is why I asked that question. So hope to report progress.
For your recruiters, Mike, you implemented the certification for your recruiters. Is that what you were?
We're in that process right now. So yeah, it's being run by our corporate in Louisville, Kentucky, across the organization. Yeah.
One tool, Mike, that we've really adopted widely in our organization is called the Intercultural Development Inventory. We've actually even sent, I think we have about 25 folks at Quad now who are qualified in providing this inventory. And what it does is it uses a common language, and it kind of separates the values-based component of how people see DEI with an actual skill set of intercultural competence. So this assessment allows people to really, it's based off of a spectrum of denial or very monocultural thinking all the way to adaptation or multicultural kind of ability to really bridge between cultural difference. And that tool has also been extremely helpful for us because everyone then understands where they are in their mindset journey. And when they're interacting with someone else, it's helpful to understand how to bridge them into some of the other more multicultural styles of thinking. So maybe that could be a resource for you.
Absolutely. And I might have to follow up with you on that.
Please do. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Happy to help.
Thank you so much. That will be helpful.
Thank you.
The question.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for your great question. I actually have a question. This was from our panel, but I will go ahead and ask it here. How do you all hold yourselves accountable to ensure an inclusive work environment?
Shall I start? This is to panel, right? Not
panel.
Wider? To panel, yeah. We've got 5 values, and we talked about, so we have putting people first, bold and decisive, learn every day, celebrate together, and take accountability. Take accountability, I think, is the 3rd in order. So take accountability for us means a lot. Interestingly, this year, for the first time, we've got a goal for our leaders around leadership and some of those basics that are not happening, you know, good one-to-ones, good career development conversations. You know, and we know from our employee experience survey that we run every 3 months that we are, you know, deficient in some of those areas, or we can at least improve in some of those areas. We're fairly strong. So, so for us, it's about accountability, and it goes right into the goals. So our leaders are accountable, and we have like a 180 feedback. All of our leadership, top leadership team, are going through a 360 feedback. For our employees, then we've also, for the first time, had a goal that's worth kind of 10% for employees holding to account. I can't remember what conversation it was that we had earlier about, I think Janara, you were talking about, like, employees are as responsible as leaders, right? You know, you can take a horse to water, but you know, you can't make it drink. So ensuring that our employees are accountable for an inclusive workplace, and our leaders are accountable for an inclusive workplace, is built into our culture, B, our DEI kind of strategy, goal, and then annual plan. But more so this year, we're building that into goals, actually 20% for our leaders and 10% for our employees for the first time, which kind of feels a little bit kind of old style, right? You know, because people are like, they should do that. But actually, when you look at it, people, like, all of our leaders don't. You know, some of our leaders are micromanagers. We're not all as inclusive as we would want to be. Everybody doesn't take all of the training that is assigned to them, for example. So I think going back to basics for us has been a really good thing to do from an accountability perspective.
Yeah, I like I like that it's broken down 5 tiers, because we've kind of had where you formalize that language. Look, we've done things very similarly where we've taken, it's all predicated on that you can't improve what you didn't measure, right? So we have the qualitative and quantitative measurements that come out first. We have a dedicated diversity recruiter role, and we have a dedicated HR data analyst role in the organization. So when we talk to people leaders, we give them, this is the demographic makeup of your organization. Here's where we're suggesting improvements, and here's where our talent team is going to step up to help you to get there. But we've also kind of formalized it within performance management. Well, like Lou mentioned, if you're a people manager and we have the data from talent acquisition, for example, that we've consistently provided you diverse candidate pools, but you've hired 0 diverse, that's part of your performance management as a people manager. We've also looked at just assessing, taking a step back before that, particularly with the pandemic, you have bad managers kind of rise to the top. And within management studies, that's referred to as a transactional manager versus what we want them to be, transformational leaders. And a transactional manager is kind of, to give you an example, they're stuck on, well, you sat at your desk at 8:05, you're supposed to be here at 8 o'clock, what's wrong with you? You know, meanwhile, the highway blew up, and or their kid was sick, those sorts of things. So part of the upside of the pandemic is kind of weeding those behaviors out. So addressing that leads to an inclusive workplace. Also educating people managers and employees about emotional intelligence. that it's okay to have empathy in the workplace. And matter of fact, it's required in the workplace, which is, again, for our environment is really a paradigm shift, that we're educating about what empathy looks like and then saying, yeah, this is required. You can't be a transactional manager here. And then again, where we keep up on the measurements, I'll give you the example that we have in one particular area where there's a heck of a lot of attrition. We've had several resignations under this one particular people manager. So then we're addressing that. We're addressing that with coaching. We're addressing it with exit interviews for the people who left. Why did you leave? Well, this person was riding me like a rented mule. Okay, we can't have that in the workplace if we're going to stay competitive. So those sorts of mechanics and how it's applied are new ventures for us as an employer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with both Lou and Gennaro. Absolutely. And, one additional way that we are holding ourselves accountable is this last year, we published for the first time an ESG report, or an environmental social governance report. And this outlines not only our current state, but goals that we are going to be reaching in the next 3 years and 5 years. And we intend to share this report on an annual basis so that our customers, our clients, our shareholders, our board, everyone can hold us accountable to what it is that we're saying and what it is that we're doing in the organization. It adds a little extra pressure, but it also helps everyone in the organization understand the importance that we're placing on things such as environmental, sustainable, or social, and some of these DEI related issues in the workplace. Now, not only is it showing up in their performance reviews, but they see it in the strategy, and their departments have to layer into that strategy. And we're beholden now to external viewership on this too.
Thank you. I have a question here from Brandon. He wants to know, how are you all dealing with the Great Resignation's effects on your human resources team? This profession is tasked with wearing many different hats, and we've seen high levels of burnout and turnover across the profession of human resources. What strategies are you all deploying to address this issue?
We're practicing what I was preaching before about internal mobility. I'd say roughly about 80% of the vacancies that have come up, and there's been quite a few in human resources, have been filled internally. And then we cascaded down and backfilled at that level. So it's afforded us the opportunity for really greater retention because we're stepping people up into roles. The burden there is to make sure that the onboarding is rigorous and thorough. So it's a combination of first-line introductions by their senior manager to the client groups that they're going to be supporting, ongoing skill craft trainings. And what I mean by that is that managers in each of the divisional areas go through skills that are relevant. They could be soft skills, not just technical skills on how to interact and process that. That rigorous onboarding also includes very thorough documentation. We heavily utilize Microsoft Teams and populate out the team structure with a lot of collateral. So somebody stepping into a position can pull a cheat sheet, so to speak, with, okay, if this comes up, here's the cheat sheet, here are the 10 steps that I got to make sure I cover to do it right. Because one of the biggest things that leads to early attrition in a role is that people come in and feel that they're overwhelmed. They don't have a compass to navigate the new job. They don't have reference material. So we put a lot of emphasis on building out a knowledge base where people could reference back and help them navigate in the new role.
Great. And Gennaro, follow up with that before we go ahead for our closing remarks. Alex asked, what does the recognition or additional compensation look like for recruiters in your human resources departments to fill those open roles? Do you have incentives in place?
We don't have, we are the odd duck on this panel, being public sector and being municipal government. There's so many limitations that are applicable here. What we are doing is really nested with our compensation team, where we're actively removing the archaic job levels and job steps within job categories that really limit compensation mobility. And what I mean by that is a lot of the stuff that's in place that we have to deal with as an HR department was figured out and put on the books 75 to 100 years ago. So it's completely outdated to modern times and the modern workforce. So within the revision of compensation, that would give us the capability to have a lot more pay flexibility within the roles. There wouldn't be any type of incentivized pay, like a performance bonus or anything like that, but we'd be able to move people within a range and move people from, you know, all compensation ranges have a min, mid, and max. We could have more latitude around moving within those ranges.
I'll just add, and a bit to your question, Brandon, and then touch on that. You know, the opportunity, but also the impact on the HR team in the last 2 years has been immense, right? And you can read, you know, particularly HR business partners, if you think about partnering with their leadership teams, helping them support their people from a recruiting space. I mean, it's wild, honestly. Finding recruiters is very difficult in this environment, particularly in a hybrid world as well. So for us, it goes back to the things that are not monetarily related, right? Really caring for our teams. We have had a number of sessions where we've just all as a team just got together and just talked about stuff. And you know, we have a EAP program. We as a leadership team, you know, this week with our people managers on Friday, we're talking about an article around you know, returning to the office, mental wellness, and you know, just checking in, honestly, and caring for people, and because we're not going to be able to alleviate that toughness, honestly, but we are going to be able to help them mentally and physically kind of support them through it as well. I think also understanding that it's no different anywhere else, right? It's been a really tough time for, you know, and kind of that everyone's in it together. But for us, I mean, we are huge on authentic leadership and just being yourself, right? And allowing people to come to work and be themselves. So I think that has probably been one of the biggest things, is just connecting, knowing new people, knowing what makes them tick, what, you know, having a cry occasionally, whatever that might take to keep people well in their own mind and at work, then has been our focus.
Caitlin, do you have anything to add before we transition?
Well, Gennaro and Lou did such a phenomenal job outlining, and I echo all of those sentiments. You know, I guess my last comment on that particular question would be to not let the small things also kind of be off the table. So for example, we just had a town hall this week, and having our CEO personally thank the recruiters for the phenomenal job that they've been doing goes such a long way. Right.
Yeah.
So they may sound small, but in addition to those incredible resources and incredible tools that Gennaro and Lou had mentioned, sometimes it's that plus the little things. You know, we sent all of our recruiters a really lovely gift basket in some of the height of the pandemic too. And it was enough to bring smiles to their faces. And even if that's temporary, it's definitely deserved during this really incredible time in their space.
Thank you. Thank you, Gennaro, Lou, and Caitlin. And thank you, Brandon and Alex, for asking your questions. Thank you all for coming and supporting IC Stars. I hope the topics discussed today were beneficial to you and they help produce initiatives in your organizations. As many of you all are aware, our current cohort who is here right now, they graduate on Thursday, March 31st. I know, yay. I'm really excited for them to see their growth over these past 3 months has been amazing. We have over an 80% placement rate for all of our cohorts, and I'm working hard to keep this statistic strong with the commencement of Cycle 9 coming up. So if any of you all have any leads or are open to supporting IC Stars in this mission, please be sure to contact me directly, and I will post my LinkedIn profile there. And I will go ahead and also pass it off to our Executive Director, Blanca, who will conclude today's event. And I hope you all have a great rest of your morning, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, Jordan. Such important discussions today, inspiring to hear how committed the Milwaukee tech ecosystem is to making these changes. So that's always such a big plus, and I always get excited when we do have these conversations. So thank you to everyone for attending our 2022 HR Roundtable and retaining your talent, and a special thanks to Molson Coors for sponsoring today's Roundtable, always championing IC Stars mission and vision. Another special shout out and gratitude to our great panel. You guys were phenomenal. Gennaro, Lou, and Caitlin, great information you shared with all of us. Thank you, Devin Hayes, for being a part of our board member support and starting us off with such a warm welcome. Thank you to Jordan and Janine for putting together this event for today. Well done. We look forward to hosting our next event, Capitalize, where we will be hosting a discussion on cybersecurity industry and the trust in the tech supply chain. This will be an in-person event at Best Place on May 12th. We look forward to seeing all of you join us, and we continue to share the important issues, that impact all of us today. And lastly, please join us as we celebrate the commencement, as Jordan mentioned, of Cycle 9 on March 31st, as we wish this highly talented group that we have here into the tech workforce and celebrate their commitment to this 4-month transformational tech program. Once again, thank you for your support this morning, and we wish you to have a great day. Thank you.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Great to meet you all.
Thank you.